That's the exact question a colleague of mine was asked a couple of days ago during our yearly internship presentation. And I remember thinking to myself, our final year students of the Department of Petroleum Engineering, are you expecting anyone else, sir? However, while my colleague was trying to answer that question, my mind began to wonder a bit as I deliberated on what was the best response to that question, just in case the examiner asked me the same thing. And as my mind wandered, I took a trip down memory lane. I was a pretty smart child growing up, however, I did not start reading early. I started reading when I was like 6 or 7, and even then, my mother had to point out words in traffic, pronounce words in the newspaper for me. She'd buy me books every other weekend, tell me bedtime stories. Fun times, fun times. However, as I took this trip down memory lane, my mind went back to a particular story I had read growing up. An ancient parable, actually. It told the story of 3 men from various parts of the country who embarked on a journey. And as 3 of them embarked on that journey, they got to a huge river. At the river bank, they saw an old sage with a small boat, and they approached him and asked him how much was his fare to help them cross to the other side. The old sage looked to them and he said, "Ah, my young friends, do not worry about the payment for this journey. It's a gift that I offer to you, free of charge. But do take heed. My vessel can only carry 1 of you at a time. As we cross this river, great opportunities and adventures wait for you on the other side. Be warned, in order to reach the promised land, you must prove yourselves worthy by passing a test. Are you ready for the challenge?" The first man boarded the boat, and as they sailed to the other side, he looked into the water, and something caught his attention. First of all, began mumbling, and soon he began shouting. In a fit of rage and anger, he stood up and he jumped into the water. The sage returned to the shore, and the second man boarded the boat. And as they sailed to the other side, just like the first, the second man looked into the water, and something caught his attention. But unlike the first, he was calm. He looked at the sage and humbly requested to be taken back to the shore, as he was not ready to complete this journey. The sage heeded to his request and took him back to the river bank. The third man boarded boat. Like the first and the second, he saw something as well in the water. But like the first, he didn't shout. Unlike the second, he wasn't confused by what he saw. As he got to the shoreline, with tears in his eyes, he thanked the sage and he went on his way. A couple of seasons went by, and the second man returned. And this time, as he and the sage sailed across the river, he looked into the water, but there was a smile on his face. He got to the other side of the river bank, and he thanked the sage, and he went on his way. Now, I remember reading this story growing up, and I remember asking myself a couple of questions like, why did the first man jump? Why did the second man leave and return? Why did the third come to the point of tears? But for some weird reason, I couldn't remember the answers to the questions this parable posed, because I read this story sometimes.
This is not a drill. This is not a drill.
Yo. Legendary here. So while Pepple is figuring out the answers to this parable, it hits me. I came up with a possible hypothesis, but my hypothesis only works on the premise that the sage, because he's old, was partially deaf. So my hypothesis is that the first man, the second man, and the third man, they all were going through the same dilemma. So the first man, he was at the extreme of that dilemma and he jumped into the water. The second man, he found a way to talk to the sage, to take him back. But the third man was a warrior. My theory is that they all wanted to do the major. They wanted to drop an offering on the porcelain throne. They wanted to drop a nuclear bomb. They wanted to do number 2. They wanted to drop a biscuit in the basket. How do I know so many alternate ways to say poop? Hold on. The sage was one that was carrying them across. The sage was an old man. The sage probably did not hear clearly when the first man was telling him to go back. So the first man jumped inside the water so that he can quickly find a way to relieve himself. The second knew sign language. By the third man knows how to hold the third man knows how to hold things in. The third man said, we died. Sometimes 2006 or 7. And as I was thinking about the answers to this parable, I was brought back to reality when my name was called It was time for my IT presentation. And as I headed to the podium, I made one simple prayer. God, please don't let this one ask me more than one question. As I got to the podium and I introduced myself, one of the examiners sat up. Something I had said had piqued his interest. Ladies and gentlemen, I got asked more questions than anyone else in my class. Just take a guess. Guess. How many questions do you think I was asked? 3? No. 5? No. 7? No. Those are for learners. I got asked 12. 12 questions. That could have ended very poorly, but for the questions I was familiar with. Thank you. After my wonderful presentation, I attempted to take a short nap. But legendary wouldn't have it. He was throwing a tantrum in my head because we had left a parable unanswered. So I began to think and try to remember. And as I sat there, my mind went back to one hot afternoon during my internship, where my boss asked me the exact same question. The examiner asked my colleague, "Who are you?" He said. So I replied, "Patrick sir, you know me. It's me, Gideon, your favorite engineering intern." Okay. I did not say favorites, but you get the idea. And he looked at me and said, No. That's not what I'm asking you. I know your name. How can I forget? I'm saying every day during lunch, I see you writing scripts and stories. You're not already looking at engineering drawings. So Gideon, I'm asking you, what do you want out of life? And genuinely speaking, I was still shocked. I did not know what to say. So Pratik was the youngest engineer on the field and one of the most intelligent, to be honest. And he went on to tell me about his story. He told me about his dreams, he told me about his aspirations, he told me about the expectations of family. And after that conversation, I was deep in thoughts. I went back and I asked the other members of my unit. I asked Mr. Michael, I asked Mr. Stanley, I asked Mahindra, and all of them had something else to say. And as I remember the individual stories of each and every one of them, my attention was called once again. Our presentation was over and it was time for everyone to go home. But first, we had to take pictures. It was tradition. So, enjoy the drip. On my way back, I finally began to recollect the answer to that ancient parable. You see, my recollection of my conversation with Pratik had somehow triggered my memory. You see, 3 men represent a spectrum of humans across time. The water represents a mirror. When we look into a mirror, we see a reflection of ourselves. The old man and his boat represents transitioning into another part, another phase of life. So, let us try to answer the questions that the parable posed. First question, why did the first man jump? The first man, like many of us, had failed to recognize his true self. He had constructed an image of himself in his mind. And when confronted with reality that he was not all he thought he was, he got angry, he got upset, and in a fit of rage, he plunged into the water to alter his reflection. The second man, pretty much like the first, looked into the water and he did not like what he had seen. But he understood that the water was only a reflection of what he had presented to it. He was not blinded by his emotions. So he took a step back. He went on a journey of re-evaluation and examined himself. And he came back when he was better suited to take that journey. The third man, on the other hand, knew what he was going to see in the water. He expected it. The reason he cried was because what he saw was not what he desired. And you might be asking, what does this represent? Who is the first? Who is the second? Who is the third? Over the course of time, we've seen the first man multiple times. We see him in our political leaders and we make statements like, he's not who I thought he was when I voted for him. We see him in pages of biblical history as Judas Iscariot. The second man represents a spectrum of humanity that I personally fall into. I one day looked into the water and I saw an engineer, and I didn't like that. So I took a step back. I came back with finance Gideon, legendary the creative, kept with the balance. The third man represents a spectrum of humanity who look into the water, and although they do not like what they see in it, they understand that they've made sacrifices so that you and I and a host of others who fall in the other 2 spectrums can look into the water and smile. We see the third man in Pratik, who wanted to become a newscaster, but he's an engineer, one of the best I know. We see third man in Mahindra, who wanted to become a farmer, but he's an engineer and one of the most hardworking I know. We see the third man in our parents, we see the third man in our loved ones, we see the third man in our mentors, we see the third man everywhere. So my question to you is, which man are you? Which spectrum do you fall in? Who are you? What makes you tick as a person? What do you want out of life? What's the one thing that when you're engaged in, you get so focused and engrossed that the fact that life is difficult fades into the background and you hear your voice in your head saying, I could do this forever. That's who you are. For me, that's being a creative. For me, that's making videos. For me, that's telling stories. For me, that's being on this journey with you.